Well, besides the agreements in Australia and Beijing we talked about earlier, just last month there was another agreement from the European Union on cutting emissions. I talked about that and how to accelerate improvements with Andrew Deutz. He's Director of International Government Relations at an advocacy group called the Nature Conservancy.
I think we're seeing a pretty fundamental shift in how the world uses and develops its energy. And we're seeing a pretty fundamental shift in the way that the nature of the economy as itself. A couple of years ago, there was a really interesting study that came out that basically said the cost of not adapting to climate change or not dealing with climate change now is going to cost a lot more. If we adapt to climate change now and put in place the right measures and change our economy, it's going to save us money over the long term. So it was about cost avoidance. The latest economics on climate change is really saying that we can actually shift to a much stronger, longer-term, more prosperous economy by shifting our energy systems and making a whole bunch of new investments in energy efficiency, land use change, and a whole range of other measures.
What about short-term measures? I mean, you look at China and you can't help but notice most of the stories about the smog and how bad it is. What are short-term incremental steps that can be taken that can have a dramatic impact quickly?
When you look at the list and chart out all the different things you can do and how much it's going to cost per ton of carbon reduced, the most efficient thing you can do is improve energy efficiency. In many cases, it has what economists call a negative cost. In other words, it pays for itself. It's actually a smart investment. The biggest opportunity for China is probably in its energy sector and in cities. So New York City just came out with a new pledge that it's going to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. The major source of its emissions is from heating and cooling its buildings. So New York City is going to try and figure out how do we build a new urban infrastructure, new urban design, and new architecture that radically reduces the energy use of buildings. Now think about what that means for China when you think that China is going to double its urban infrastructure in the next 2 decades. It has the opportunity to figure out a really smart way to do that and become a global leader in smart design and innovation. The other really cost-effective thing we can do is stop deforestation. Right now, tropical deforestation emits as much greenhouse gases into the atmosphere as all the trains, planes, and automobiles in the world combined. If we're able to stop that and get to the point where you have zero net deforestation, I mean, there'll still be some deforestation, but if you're replanting forest, you get a net balance. If we can figure that out, the costs are very low, and it's probably the cheapest short-term measure we can do. And then there's a range of other things we can do to improve our agricultural productivity, to both grow more food and reduce emissions, and a range of other things as you start scaling up the energy sector in terms of renewable energy deployment beyond energy efficiency.
Andrew, one final question. Targets are great. You can say we're going to hit this target, we're going to hit that target, but actually hitting the targets is another thing altogether. How realistic are some of these targets?
Well, if you look at the European target, 40% by 2030, it's pretty ambitious, but they're on target to meet their current commitments under the Kyoto Protocol. In the case of the United States, our current commitment is 17% by 2020, and we're actually on target to meet that. So we've now, President Obama has announced extending that out to 2025 and reducing to 26 or 28. It's doable. It's going to require taking our current policies and going further. But it's, I would think, a realistic, achievable benchmark that's going to be out there. The most important thing that I see happening between the announcement in China, the US, and Europe now is that countries are saying this is the future, we're committed to it, and we're going to start turning the way we run our economies. None of these commitments, none of these targets are adequate to keep the planet safe, but it starts to bend the curve, and then the next step will be to accelerate how fast the world decarbonizes.
Andrew, thanks so much.
Thank you.